Welcome everyone. As people are joining, we might just give it another quick minute. I see those numbers ticking up. So welcome as you all join our conversation this afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Okay, welcome again. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome the Fred community, all of you joining from various geographies and industries, and to anyone who's new to our Fred community, a warm welcome. My name is Kimberly Fernandez, and I'm a member of the Fred Leadership Board and your moderator and host for today's terrific discussion on improving diversity and inclusion through psychological safety. A few housekeeping notes, if you will, for anyone new to our Fred community. Fred is a nonprofit organization that stands for the future of executive development. And our founders created the organization with a really powerful vision to cultivate more ethical, inclusive, and transformational leaders, something I believe our world is in greater and greater need of. We welcome new members to help us with this inspiring mission. If you're interested in joining us or learning more about us, you can find that information at fredleadership.org. And today is a Nexus event. And so really what those are events that we produce on a monthly basis intended to create a forum to hear exciting speakers, engage in a community conversation across a range of topics that are meaningful, and to continue to build community. I know that continues to be hard in a virtual environment, despite the fact that many of us may have Zoom fatigue. So thank you for joining. By way of introduction, I lead our L&OD function at the wonderful company. And this particular topic is near and dear to my heart, as I'm sure it is to many of you. The challenge for all of us as people, academics, practitioners, across our variety of roles and industries is to try to create a more inclusive environment where we can fully be ourselves and contribute. And we continue to be challenged with how to do that. And so I'm delighted to have two speakers who are very, I was going to say experts that are going to guide us in today's discussion. Zaheera Soomar, who runs an independent consultancy focusing on strategy, org change, and many other transformational things, and Dr. James Pogue, founder and CEO of JP Enterprises, who focuses on leadership in the DEI space. Their full bios, which I clearly am not doing justice to, you will see on the Eventbrite invitation, and I will invite them to do a better introduction of themselves. So without further ado, Zaheera and James, thank you so much for being with me today. Would love to ask you to introduce yourselves and specifically why you are interested in this topic around improving D&I through psychological safety. Why have this conversation with us today? Zaheera, I'll invite you to kick us off.
Thanks, Kimberly. And let me say I'm thrilled to be here and honored as well, and honored to just also be with my co-panelist, Dr. James Pogue, who I have tremendous respect for. So DEI and all aspects of DEI is a topic that I never get tired of engaging on. I also never get tired of learning about. So I by no means call myself an expert on DEI. I think we constantly evolve and learn about this area. The more work that we do, and probably the more work that we do, the more we realize, the less we know. So it's part and parcel of me. A bit about me though, I am originally from South Africa. So very much grew up in what we call post-apartheid space. I've been privy to various efforts within South Africa to really transform the country into a country that strives to be equal, diverse, and fair. You know, whether we're there yet, that's a different story, and we can have a different conversation about that one day. But in terms of my work experience, I have over 17 years of corporate space and world of work experience. Most of my work has been kind of in very male-dominated environments, oil and gas, mining and consulting. And there are many times when I have been the only woman or the only person of color or one of a very few sitting at the table. So I've certainly have had many ups and many downs in my journey and in my career. And I've been subject to fantastic things, but I've also been subject to things like discrimination, unfair treatment, harassment, tokenism, disrespect, you name it. And so DEI is very personal to me, and I'm very passionate about it because of my own personal experiences. Currently, I'm part of a global mining organization. I head up our socioeconomic, part of our socioeconomic development portfolio across a variety of different countries, many of which those countries suffer tremendously from poverty, inequality, gender and racial discrimination. And so DEI forms part of my core work that I do day in and day out as well. As Kimberly mentioned, I also have my own advisory practice where I specialize in a few areas. And a big part of that is DEI work with various companies around the globe. I'm also busy studying and doing my doctorate in the future of work and organizational change, of which DEI is again brought into. You can see I kind of bring it into all aspects of my life. And then more recently, I entered the world of a tech startup, which one of my tech startups actually just launched this past Monday. So Kimberly, to come back to your question, why am I here? Short and sweet, I believe in equality, equity, and fair treatment for all. I believe that many organizations want to do the right thing, but they don't always know how to. And they think that doing the right thing when it comes to DEI is a trade-off, but it really isn't. I've also had to, anybody who's had to fight four aspects of DEI will understand this. It chips away at your soul a little bit by little every single time you fight the fight. And I'm sure many of you can understand that. And so part of why I do this is that there are so many people who have put themselves out there, who have tried to make a difference. And I have two daughters, I have nieces, I have many women, people of color, and just anybody, within my space of friends, family, acquaintances, etc. And I don't feel that we all need to chip away when trying to do these efforts. So I really want to try and make a difference. And I really want to, even if I make a small difference with my life and my efforts, I feel it's worth it.
Zaheera, thank you so much for that personal introduction, and what a beautiful testament to the way that what I can hear from your own personal values and lived experience, how that translates into your professional expertise and impact that you make. Dr. Pogue, over to you. Welcome.
Sure. Initially, thank you, Kimberly, so much. And I was so glad to be asked to do this, and sharing the screen/stage with Zaheera is outstanding as well. She undersells her competence and expertise. But it's an odd thing, and I'll enter with this, is that I have met over even this past year of ups and downs and trials and tribulations as it relates to the upheaval and the social unrest that we've all been experiencing in one way or another, that I've met some really, really passionate and brilliant and compassionate and empathetic folks. And there's some themes that run into that. And those people that are out there tilling the ground and working hard and putting their shoulder to the wheel are often the most self-deprecating and the most humble. And I wonder at times if that humility can preclude some of our success, and that maybe we should be waving our flags a little harder, a little higher, a little faster, in the kinds of ways that our counterparts, and I won't say adversaries, but our counterparts are waving their flags hard and strong too. And so it lends itself to this aspect around psychological safety that we're going to be talking more about today. We have to figure out the right ways to have very difficult conversations, how to create safer situations for folks to poke one another with a stick, and to do so with compassion and empathy and love. Because if we can't get there together, we don't get there. There are many organizations that are rushing to optics, but they're not rushing to action. And I can respect some of the reasons that they don't. It may not be safe out there. It may not be safe for someone who's trying to do the right thing. And I believe that most people are good people that are trying to do the right thing, but it may not be safe out there for them to have a clumsy, awkward conversation about gender or race or religion or politics or age or ability, disability. So we have to figure out the ways to create those safer environments. And I'm grateful to have this discussion. I began my consulting work in about 2008 or so, after spending some time in academia. and started out wanting to create a better opportunity for people of color in the US to move through the educational pipeline. And that began to broaden out into the healthcare space and then into nonprofits and the corporate organizations now as well. And I'll just share one piece about how things have shifted for me in the last 18 months or so. 24 months, I was flying around the world doing public speaking, keynoting here and there with just a bit of consulting. The world, of course, shuts down for me like it did everybody else. And now things have shifted. I spend the vast majority of my time consulting with leaders and organizations, helping them to develop strategy on how they can approach this version of the work. And I think this is a great place to be. I wonder at times if, the tools that we used then, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, were probably great at the time. But in a diversity 2.0 world, I'm not as confident in those tools in this world. And I think one of the tools that we have to spend a bit more time sharpening is this one around psychological safety.
Thank you, Dr. Pogue. What a great introduction as well. If anybody is joining us, you're joining me, Kimberly Fernandez, in a conversation with Dr. James Pogue and Zaheera Soomar, focusing on the topic of diversity and inclusion through psychological safety. And we're going to level set with what that means in just a second. For anybody looking at the Zoom toolbar on the bottom, you'll notice that we have not enabled the chat. We really want to, again, focus our conversation in dialogue with Zaheera and James, but invite any questions that you have along the way in the Q&A section. So there'll be a Q&A button at the bottom. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout and I'll incorporate them into our conversation. So with that, let's begin with setting the stage. What do we mean when we say psychological safety? I feel like that term is sort of thrown around, a little bit of pop psychology. We all think we know what we're talking about. Zaheera, could you help define that for us and what we mean in the context of this conversation?
Yeah, let's start with a very general definition of psychological safety that most people have heard at some point, right? If you Google or you pick up any document on psychological safety, the typical definition that you'll get is psychological safety is the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. That when you have psychological safety in the workplace, people feel comfortable being themselves. What does that look like or feel like in practice? Well, in psychologically safe teams, team members express mutual respect. They trust each other, they show interest in each other as people, right? A key word being mutual. So it's regardless of hierarchy, but it's a mutual respect, mutual interest, mutual trust that happens within teams. Teams also do not attack each other. They don't attack each other's knowledge, the competence levels, motivations, personality, or character. So that's what it feels like in practice. I read an article not too long ago which stated that, which was focused on psychological safety and stated that opinions and arguments should be decoupled from the personality of the person expressing them. Now, it made me think about a little bit about that in terms of psychological safety. And we all know that that's hard because we all have conscious and unconscious bias. And it's all different because it's all stemmed from our own experience, our own exposure, our own growth, where we come from, what we're exposed to, etc. Our biases are associated to things like gender, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, but not only that, the way each of us communicate express our ideas are because of who we are, right? Those very same things that impact our conscious and unconscious bias also impact us and the way we express ourselves. So our personality and our character are very intertwined with the way we do things and the way we also interpret things. And therefore decoupling your personality, I think people need to understand what that means in terms of what does it mean from a psychologically safe perspective, because sometimes you need to also understand the person and the character to understand and appreciate the way that they are communicating and expressing themselves. And as a very simple example, it could be, how do you convey respect in some, or how do you meet someone? In some countries, pre-COVID, shaking a hand would be, a good gesture of meeting someone. In some countries, you don't shake hand or you don't even make eye contact. So you need to understand those things. So part of, for me, when we talk about decoupling, part of what I feel is not judging someone also means not imposing your own personality or experiences on them by interpreting their expression. I also wanted to share that I read an HBR article recently, which also talked about the positive emotion on success. One of the professors from University of North Carolina found that positive emotion like trust, curiosity, confidence, broadens the mind and also helps us build psychological, social, and physical safety. So, this safety allows us to be more open-minded, resilient, motivated. And ultimately, we laugh more when we feel safe. And we also ideate more, we also solve more when we feel safe, right? So we can do more when we have that psychological safety, and there's more value to be gained with that psychological safety. And then lastly, let me just express what psychological safety is not. It's not about one individual rather than a group. It's not about one individual feeling safe at the expense of others. And it's not about one individual being able to say whatever they want to at the expense of others. So let me stop there and leave it at that. And James, please feel free to add on.
Yeah, Zaheera, thank you so much. You gave us a lot to think of. I was reflecting as you were defining it and expanding that cognitively. I'm tracking with you, but this whole notion of decoupling personality, and I was reflecting on the fact that there's so much of who we are in context, and the thought of separating that. My reaction is it requires a heightened level of consciousness in order to be able to enact this concept in a meaningful way, right? So that's just a quick reflection back, which is stimulating. James, I'm wondering if you could, of course, feel free to build upon Zaheera's definition, but if you could contextualize a little bit further for us, psychological safety within diversity and inclusion. Why does it matter?
Yeah, I'll start with, sort of teeing up after, as she kind of concluded, that idea of it's not for the one to feel safe as opposed to the group. And it has to be for everybody. There are people, whether they are enfranchised or disenfranchised, that need to be at the table. And if I'm coming to the table as an privileged, enfranchised person, I also need to feel safe and be able to explore my ideas so someone can share with me in a respectful way what it is I don't see, the biases that I might have. I'm not here to be beat up. I'm here to learn. I'm here to grow, right? And similarly, the disenfranchised, if you will, person deserves that honor and respect as well. I think that the piece that cannot be safe in a conversation that is umbrellaed by psychological safety is the system itself. The system must be unsafe. It must be attacked or critiqued. It must be torn down. It must be seen and viewed from all levels. I think there is an argument for those that are enfranchised, that they are, from a perspective, they too are victims of the system, that the system must be seen for what it is, that the rules oftentimes that advantage people, I may be the one that gets the advantage of it, right? But I have to be shown that I'm getting the advantage of it so that I can be helpful. And I have to be able to ask questions like, well, why? Or how? Or when? Or who did that? To whom did it happen? Help me understand. I have to be allowed to be ignorant. I have to be allowed to be humble. I have to be allowed to be curious. And when I am not, and I feel that it's not a safe environment and that I'm being attacked by others, I can't grow and therefore change things. Why is this important in DEI? In the States, I tell people often that when women wanted the right to vote, they had to beg powerful white men for the opportunity to do so. They had to beg. When people that had various kinds of seen and unseen disabilities wanted change to happen in the States, they had to beg powerful white men to make these changes. Now, that being said, there are some really good guys that said, okay, I understand better now, let's make the change. So I don't put it out there as, oh my goodness, these terrible people. No, they just they happen to be in that position. They were the enfranchised group. But someone had to beg them to do that. And you can't have these conversations if I'm just beating you up all the time. If I'm just saying, pick yourself up by your bootstraps all the time. No, somebody has to tell me you don't even have boots. It's rude for me to ask you to pick you up by your bootstraps and you don't have boots. Right? It's also a bit rude for me to say, hey, give me some more opportunity and power. I have not been educated to see that I have all the power. I may not see it. So we have to create these environments where it allows us to grow, allows us to develop, allows us to learn, allows us to question one another. And from my perspective, most critically, question the systems that we grow up and work and live underneath.
Great, thank you so much. Moving back to Zaheera, what you had mentioned, I think when you began the definition of psychological safety, saying it has to go beyond people feeling empowered to speak up. Can you share a little bit about what that means in terms of going beyond speaking up? And you and I talked a little bit in preparation about this concept of shade experience. I'd love if you could build upon that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to come back to the discussion we just had, James, at some point, because I think some of the big things that I struggle with around that, and I absolutely agree with you, is that psychological safety is for all. But at what point, how much do you allow for that before it comes to a point of, it's now too much that both sides are giving. And I think that that's sometimes a really difficult thing to figure out in terms of when am I giving too much now? So it would be interesting to come back to that point because I'd be keen to get your thoughts on that as well. But Kimberly, to answer your question, yeah, look, I've been scanning a lot of the efforts that big organizations and small organizations are doing around DEI and psychological safety. And you find speak up is the very common term that gets used when they talk about psychological safety, and they talk about what are we doing? We are creating a good speak up culture. And that's fantastic because that's really important. But let's just talk about speak up and what it means and what is needed beyond that for psychological safety. Earlier, we talked about the definition of psychological safety, and we started off with a general understanding. In most definitions of psychological safety, it talks about having one's voice being heard or being able to voice your opinion. And because of that word voice, or because it's always framed around voicing things, ideas, concerns, whatever it is, there's always this focus or understanding around the voice being the aspect, and therefore speak up being the notion to address psychological safety. And that's what we focus on. So many efforts when it comes to psychological safety and DEI in the workplace is focused around the culture of speak up. Everybody gets to be heard, respected, and allowed to express their view and not judged for it. And like I said, absolutely right, but it's not the only part of psychological safety. When we talk about psychological safety, we also talk about the ability to have a voice and doing it without fear of negative repercussions. There's an aspect of just before speak up around the ability, and just after speak up around what happens, right? A fear of negative repercussions. And when we talk about speak up is very much kind of what happens in that room at that moment in time when you're expressing yourself, but what's before and what's afterwards. There's two things, there's a few that you could talk about. There's two things for me that I like to focus on. The one is social agency, and the other one is accountability. Let's talk a bit about social agency and what it means with regards to psychological safety. So social agency talks about one's ability to influence or transform something based on how they feel and fit in that space in relation to others, in relation to the group or the team that they're in, the broader network, the systems, the processes, how do they feel? So this is linked to your ability to have a voice. And the more agency you have, the more likely you are to feel comfortable and therefore psychologically safe to speak up. I'll give you a personal example to express this. I worked for, very early on in my career, I worked for an oil and gas company, a global oil and gas company, which at that time was still thought of as a very white male dominated environment. And people told me, you really want to go into that kind of environment, especially at this young age? And I said, well, why not? And many people felt, I don't want to say sorry for me, but they thought it was hard because of, what they thought the societal notion of oil and gas companies. I was in the organization, but I was surrounded by many women, not many in my department, but many women. I was surrounded by many people of color. There were many people who came from my profession and other professional backgrounds, similar education, but also different. I was surrounded by people who were mothers, who were wives, who were fathers, who were husbands, but also individual people. But there was a mix of everything. And despite what people thought about oil and gas companies, I felt I had good social agency because there was enough of me to feel safe to voice my opinions and speak up. So my social agency was good. 15 years later, much more mature, much more experienced, fought a lot more battles, land up in a consulting firm. And I'm very senior within the consulting firm, probably, one of the only woman at the top level, one of the only people of color, and very different educational and professional background to many. And despite my hierarchy in the firm, my social agency was very low. And I felt very unsafe psychologically. So there's a link between social agency and psychological safety. And so when we, in DEI, when we talk about having good representation across the board, it's not a numbers game. It's not to just tick off the numbers and say, oh, we've got 50% this and 50% that. You're talking about social agency. You're giving people the ability to feel inclusive and enough of a social agency that gives them that psychological safety. And that's why you have good representation in the firm. And then when we come to the other part of it, which was accountability, accountability really focuses kind of on, down the line aspects of psychological safety. And think about it in this way, we spend a lot of time working on speak up to get employees to feel safe to speak up and not feel vulnerable. But once an employee does speak up, they are exposed, they are vulnerable at that stage, and at that stage, how the organization, how the leader, how their colleagues react or manage that to that speak up makes an employee feel safe or unsafe post the speak up. And if the correct post speak up measurement is not in place, it can actually leave an employee feeling very vulnerable and actually regress compared to where they started off at. And so really, when we talk about accountability, it's about, back to James's comment around systems and processes, where you've really got to scrutinize it. What systems and processes are there to support the speak up? Not just the leaders and the colleagues, but what is the system and process there to support what happens after speak up? And I say it's important because, again, I've seen this so many times, not just my own experience, but I've seen this so many times, time and time again. Again, a person of color builds up the courage to speak up, speaks up, feels vulnerable. The organization and the leader has the best of intentions, wants to do something about it, doesn't really know how to act. The systems and processes are not there yet to support or react to the speak up. And what a leader usually tells, and we've seen this a lot now since the Black Lives Matter movement, is that a leader or an organization will say to that person, we are going to address this, but I need you to give me time to figure out how to process this or deal with it. And I will eventually, but I need time to just deal with it. And that's good intentions, great. And I respect the good intentions, but understand you are leaving that person feeling exposed, vulnerable, unattended to, and you asking that person to stay in that feeling until you figure out your stuff, right? And many times what happens is that person doesn't actually feel safe for such a long time that the only out or option they feel they have is to leave and start somewhere fresh. And we're seeing this too many times in different companies, different sectors around the world, and it's not okay. The intentions are great, and I'll say that again, intentions are great and it's respectable. But is it fair to ask that employee once they've spoken up to stay in that space? So let me leave it there.
Here, if I could just jump in, and I think your example is so powerful. And I want to ask people that are part of the conversation just to play a little chess with me here. If we use Zaheera's example of being the person who speaks up, the person of color or the female who speaks up, in relation to who is she speaking up? In relation to whom is she disenfranchised? And oftentimes that it's the enfranchised group, the empowered group, the one that by assumption and assimilation has more power, is taking less risk, right? And so inherently the disenfranchised person who raises their hand and says, I want to talk about something, is taking more risk than the person who is empowered, who can handle more risk. So over and over again, when we're saying, okay, well, you need to speak up. Who needs to speak up? We're asking the disenfranchised person to speak up and solve their own problem. How is that reasonable? And again, in comparison to whom? And here, if you keep asking the question, in comparison to whom? In comparison to whom? We see over and over again, it is a group of folks that are enfranchised and empowered, that are seen as supreme and superior, and the comparative group. That also is not fair. So we have to think this thing is chess and not checkers. And there is the part, well, yeah, okay, James, you've been in the game long enough, raise your hand and speak up. What about the person who's only been here 2 years instead of 20? And so we need to just make sure that when we're thinking about, hey, speak up, do your thing, we should also be demanding that leaders speak up. We should also be demanding that people not of color, as if white is not a color. Of course it is. Our white friends need to speak up too. Our white male colleagues need to speak up too and say, hey, I've got a question about this. It's been noodling around in my head. I'm curious about it. I'm uncomfortable about it. We need to have a discussion about it. And just because there's nobody brown at the table doesn't mean we can't talk about brown issues. Just because there's no women that are part of the executive leadership team doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about women's issues. You see, when a healthy, mature organization will demand of itself conversations around the subtleties of diversity, inclusion, and bias, absent that group that is there. You want to be relevant 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years from now, those are the kinds of things that we need to push. And if in a healthy organization, again, C-suite, call them all white guys, good guys. This is the good guys. They should be demanding of themselves the conversations around inclusivity and diversity and bias and microaggressions and so on and so forth that are happening within their company. Brene Brown said recently, how did she phrase it? You can't be a diverse leader if you're not leading a diverse life. She's not saying that you got to have black friends, brown friends, female friends. She's saying you have to have these ideas in your head. They have to be noodling around. You have to go to, there's not a such thing as black Google or brown Google or women's Google. Google it. Figure it out. Watch the documentary. Download something. Netflix is available for a lot of people. Some of us not even using our own passwords a day. So it's available. Watch the stuff, ask some questions about it, right? And then begin to push that information out. If we don't, we are leaving it to the disenfranchised people to carry the majority of the water and be responsible for the majority of the change when they have the minority of the power, the minority of the positions, and the minority of the influence. And it's sort of like saying a lady who is unfortunately assaulted, I'm going to need you to go ahead and fix the problem around your own assault. Come on now. That's inappropriate, illogical, and ethically and morally bankrupt.
I am not quite sure how to do justice in, a summation of so much wisdom that you both shared with us. Some thoughts or reflections. Zaheera, one of the things that resonated with me was this notion of intention versus impact, or some of the unintended consequences that accompany very well-intentioned actions or words. And James, I'm seeing some reactions from people I know that are on the call feeling fired up and empowered by the challenge, the gauntlet really that you're laying down for all of us, right? To me, what I love about this conversation is, in order to be a mature organization, which I think many of us aspire to create or be a part of, there has to be psychological safety for all. And one of the things that's resonating, I'm sure, with our listeners and participants today is, what's our role in that? How do I assess my own privilege, my own agency? What is the risk tolerance that we each hold? How different is that? How do I lean in and challenge myself? And I'm reflecting on some of the leadership conversations that we've had at my organization. And I'm sure I've been victim to, as Zaheera said, having people wait. And what is that tension between kind of having those ideas, but translating that into action? Very much resonating with me. I'd like to tee up another question, if I may, but invite questions in the Q&A function, as I know many people are wanting to ask you different things. Not the most, elegant transition, but I know that my colleagues that are sit in operational roles like myself want to know, how do we put this into practice? We've sort of talked about the concept of psychological safety in academic terms, if you will. James, you've talked to us about some practical implications, of course, but if we could take a step back and think about the fact that most organizations want to do right by their people. Let's assume good intent. Let's assume positive intent. Why do all these DEI initiatives fail? What differentiates successful ones from the ones that don't? What have you seen? James, if I could start with you.
There has to be 10, 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, we started using this term called courageous and vulnerable leadership. Well, we need to use that, you see. And so we have not been demanding of ourselves our best when it comes to courageous leadership, utilizing the diversity lens. And when I say diverse, I'm talking about the broad spectrum of diversity, right? I was working with a group just a few days ago, and there's a group full of very good guys, and they all happen to be white guys and one white lady. And I asked, what came up was around covert and overt isms. And one guy says, look, James, I can promise you, as long as I've been at this organization 20 plus years, I cannot think of a time when I've seen it happen covertly or overtly at all. And they're dialoguing about it, and I'm poking people with sticks. Are you sure? Let's define covert and overt. Make sure we're speaking the same language. You good with that? One of his colleagues says, he's been working with for 15, 18 years. He says, as you're talking, I realized this. When I am putting a woman up to be promoted and I'm advocating for her to be promoted, I talk differently. I talk about how she is strong and articulate, and she's this and she's, I do it differently. I drive my points home differently. I use different language. I'm making sure that I'm crossing certain T's and dotting certain I's differently when I do it for the men that I want to advocate for promotion. It doesn't mean that they're less qualified. I just know that I do it differently. And I said, boom, what do y'all think about that, right? This happened because you got a group of people that trust one another. They've been working together for a while. They believe in one another's good intentions, to your point. And somebody said, I think a light came on. That's what we have to do. That's what can happen if we talk to one another and we have the right kind of prompts. And sometimes it requires a facilitator that's coming from someplace else because you don't know how to do it yet. I make no assumptions that people in C-suites or boards or teams or otherwise know how to do this stuff. When would you have been trained to do it? You're in finance, you're in marketing, you're in operations. You're not supposed to know. And just because I'm Black and I work in accounting, don't call me up to facilitate your conversation around brownness, because that's not my job. My job is to count things. I'm an accountant. Find somebody who facilitates conversation around difference to poke you in the eye about that and compensate them instead of asking me to do it for free. There's a word for asking people who are brown skinned to do stuff for free. We've done that before. So how about we do something different, which is to bring some expertise in to help move people forward. And when we do that, When we create this psychologically safe environment, safer environment, where it's okay to say the wrong thing and be awkward and clumsy, but you trust that I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it because this is the words I know how to use. That's how we can make some progress. And if you're not willing to do that, leader, ma'am, sir, I suggest to you that you are following and not leading. It's called leadership for a reason. You're supposed to be uncomfortable. If you don't want to be uncomfortable, perhaps it's time for you to abdicate that to somebody who's willing to lead in this space. If it was easy, everybody do it. People get compensated highly to make tough decisions in uncomfortable spaces. And so it's fair for us to make demands of leaders in this space too.
I wanted to add to that, Kimberly, if that's okay. I think that, and some of this has already been talked about, but I was jotting down certain things with regards to this question. A few things. One is, it is for all. DEI isn't for minority groups. It is for all. I actually have a fellow colleague on the call at the moment, and we're just busy wrapping up a project, a DEI project together in the UK. I kid you not, but the white male in that organization is the minority group. And we actually had one of our colleagues from our client team on the call today, and she smiled about it and said, I can't actually talk about white males being minorities, but that's the thing. The minority group isn't always the female or the black person or the brown person, in different parts of the world, the minority group will be different from what you think is the stereotype. So DEI is for all, right? And I think we need to think about it that way. The second thing is, if you don't think about that DEI is for all, you create exclusion by inclusion. You think about who's it for, and then you exclude by not including. And that's not great either, because what you're doing is you're actually creating anti-DEI folks who are now disenfranchised by the very efforts that are supposed to enfranchise all. And so we have to be conscious of that, to not exclude by including. The third thing I wanted to talk about is that it's also not a tick box exercise, which is again what we're seeing. And I think there's an aspect of DEI work that will feel like a tick box exercise, and that's to do with processes and systems. And fair enough, you do have to attend to some of that. But if it's only a tick box exercise to just put up there and show the world they've got 50% brown people, got a process for this, and in our hiring note we put there, we support DEI candidates, etc. That's not good enough, and you're not going to achieve, because you're not going to achieve psychological safety. You're not going to achieve a good culture. You're not going to achieve inclusion. You're not going to change bias. So it's not a tick box exercise. If you truly understand the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, no one will need to be convinced of doing it, because the value of it is immeasurable. It's extremely great for a business. And that's what I meant earlier when I said there is no trade-off. But many organizations think there is a trade-off. You're not trading off anything. You're trading up when you do DEI work, if you truly believe in it. And then last, I wanted to add, and I know James and I have talked about this before, which is it's not personal. I'll tell you this as a minority candidate, as a female, as a person of color, and someone with a very ethnic background. It's not personal when I talk about it. It's personal, but it's not personal to you when I talk about it as a one-on-one. When somebody from a minority background is speaking up about DEI, understand they are coming with decades of disenfranchisement on their back and representing a whole cohort of people, and they're enraged and angry, right? It's not personal. The rage is not against you. It's not angry against you. It's people are just built up and pented up about this issue. So as best as you can, don't take it personally. And one last comment on this is that when somebody does want, if you are the enfranchised person and a disenfranchised person wants to talk to you about this, I've seen many people give advice on just listen. And that's great, but you need to also engage. Listen, process, take the time. But if you only listen and we don't ever talk about it, and I'm the only person doing the talking and nobody else is talking back, then there's no engagement. Take the time to listen and process it, but you have to also speak, like James said. You have to engage on the topic. And we all collectively have to do our part. Me, as a person of color, I need to make the person who I'm speaking to feel comfortable and psychologically safe to engage me on their topic and not go with them at with a knife in my hand, So those are some of the things on a very practical level that I see failing when we talk about DEI and when we do DEI efforts.
Yeah, thank you so much, James and Zaheera. I think that to me, that underlying message is a shared accountability. Sort of no one is off the hook. You can't really opt out as an individual if you want to help achieve this collective psychological safety, which will then, enable the success that we're all looking to achieve. There's a question in the Q&A by Amber Nelson. Amber, thank you for submitting your question. I understand that the leader company that receives the feedback or idea should not tell the person, in this case, I think in response to what you had mentioned, the person who spoke up, that they need to think about the idea and get back to them. What is the correct response? James, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'll start with where Zaheera ended, which is to listen and engage. And I think that provides the person some value that they have been valid, their experience is valid. And I also think that you need to, if you're the leader, you need to say, I got it. I'm working on this now. You've done your part, right? I'm going to work on this now. And then I'm going to check back in with you and let you know what the process is within reason, right? It may take time, but it's not on them. It's on you now. To recognize as the leader, you've probably been exposed to the tip of that person's iceberg, right? And so value and respect that and take the ownership, take the work, because they've done their part. And then you carry that water the next few steps, right? So I think that you value and honor their gift to you of an exposure of a situation or an issue or a concern. You value that and you say, look, I take that pressure, take that work, and then move to the next level. And then circle back around, close the loop and say, hey, I'm working on this. Want to let you know, I haven't forgotten about you. This is the progress that we've made. I think that allows the person to say, you know what? I might go back to you with another issue. I can trust you to expose more concerns, right? And you never know what may happen thereafter in terms of your own individual growth, right? So I think that is a path that one could walk when certain circumstances like that occur.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think there's, and I fully agree with you, James. I think it totally depends on the situation and context at hand. Sometimes each situation is never the same. In that situation, it depends, where you are hierarchically in the organization as well. Are you part of this group to be sorting this matter out? Are you not part of it? So there's no one answer that suits all. A few things that I like and I encourage leaders to do is one, when you've sat that person down and they've expressed and spoken up to you, ask them, what would you like to see happen? What do you think should change? Don't say, thank you for telling me. I'm going to go off into my black hole over there with some other colleagues and I'm going to figure it out and you'll feel a change next time this happens, right? Ask them, what would have been the right thing in this situation that you've just explained to me? What would have been the appropriate feeling or experience that you would have felt? What would you like to see different, right? Let that person explain to you and answer you. And then go on a journey with them. And I've had many of these conversations. They'll explain to you, I would have liked this to happen and this to happen and this to happen. And in your mind, it might sound very reasonable. It also might sound unreasonable, but you have an opportunity to level set with that person. You have an opportunity to change your mind and theirs and get closer to an agreed right experience, right? And sometimes, in that situation, I've had people tell me when I've asked them, what would you have liked to see? What would you like to see happen, or what would you have liked to experience? Their response to me sometimes is bizarre. And I say, do you think that would be fair on others? Do you think that that would actually discriminate against others? And is that the right route? And they actually, what you're getting them to do is you're getting them to process the thought. And eventually you both go down that line and you get to, actually, well, this is what it looks like, And so one is ask them for their opinion. Number two is don't exclude them from the process. Like James said, keep them updated. Let them be part of it if they want to. Let them co-create or solve for you. It doesn't have to be you and only you that goes into this corner and solves for it. Ask them for their opinion and then continue to check in with them, right? The other thing that I've also seen happen a few times is someone speaks up and a colleague might inappropriately react. And in that moment, a leader is faced with, what do I do? I've had an employee who's spoken up and I've had another employee who's inappropriately reacted. What do I do? And sometimes leaders get it right and sometimes they don't. But it's an important reaction to have in how you deal with that situation because it sets the tone for your organization. So I'm going to say, Amber, I hope that helps you. There's no one right answer. It's very context driven, but for me, it's about continue to engage, talk to the person, ask them.
Thank you both for those answers and thank you for that question. I do want to reiterate from my perspective that leadership in context is so critical to any of these conversations or concepts that we're describing. You cannot shift culture until you understand the culture within which you're operating. You cannot challenge and be an agent for others if you don't cultivate some self-awareness around where your shortcomings might be or your bias. And so, clearly an L&D person, but I think you have to recognize where you are on this journey first in order to help move the needle for your organization, for others. We are getting to the close of what has been a fantastic conversation. I would just invite, James and Zaheera, any closing comments on this topic or anything you want to leave our members with this afternoon?
I'll start. I'll be very brief. We have to continue to do the work. And your work is going to be different than the work of the person across from you. But if you're a leader, just like you're a leader in anything else, you need to lead in this. I'm so grateful for the time that Zaheera has given to this, and I'm listening to her responses and I'm taking notes. I mean, she's just unbelievably bright. And thank you for asking me to be a part of this, Zaheera. I really appreciate it. And Kimberly, thank you for your time. But folks, we're on our way somewhere. We get to determine to some extent where that there is. And we may not be able to get all the way to the top of the mountain, so to speak. And I've kind of determined for myself, I may not be able to get all the way where I want to within the context of my career. But I do believe that if I don't do my part, I have dishonored the work of those that came before me and made much more work for those that are coming after me. And that's just unfair. So let's all join hands and jump off a cliff together and keep working really hard. And I think we can get closer to where we need to be. And for our children and our children's children, the world will be a much better place.
Yeah, I echo James's sentiment. I think, DEI work is for all of us. I think there's a lot of organizations who are doing this with, in a really good way and with good intentions, with good efforts. I would encourage organizations to do this to the best of their abilities. Seek help where you need to seek help. Do the best that you can. Involve your people. But this is for all. DEI is for all. This is not for one group of people. It's not for minorities. It's not for ethnic-based people. It's for all. The value that we get in society when we do DEI and have more equality, equity, fairness. It's for all of us, right? It's for our kids. It's for future nations. And I mean, if we just take today, if we look at all the turmoil in this world, it all stems from inequality, unfairness, lack of human rights, right? So we have to do this. It's for broader nations. It's for all of us. And we have to continue to fight because it's not a small thing. We continue to see this over and over. Last year we saw Black Lives Matter. This year we're seeing a whole notion of things playing out. So it fits within a broader context, and it is for all of us, to benefit all of us. It's not to make the enfranchised disenfranchised. It's to make everyone equal. So yeah, I hope that this was helpful. It was an honor to speak with you, Kimberly and James, today. And yeah, I do, we'd both James and I would love to engage with anybody further who would love to engage.
Yeah, with that, Zaheera and James, thank you so much. It was an honor for me as well. We have the contact information for Zaheera and James available. Sam's going to put that up on a slide now for anybody that would like to continue this conversation or connect with them. I also want to acknowledge in the Q&A a very challenging situation that an attendee shared, and I have empathy for that situation. I'm sorry that we could not talk and answer everybody's question. Femi, I see yours as well. So thank you for the virtual engagement and time and energy that everybody gave this conversation. We encourage you to continue it within your organizations, your peers, your families. I love James's reminder of Brene Brown's, challenge to us, right? In order to move this work forward, you have to have a diverse life. So hopefully we're all going about doing that in our own way. Thank you again, everybody, for your time. Talk to you soon.
Cheers. Bye.